Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored, and actually that's not just saying something. Rape and Antiquity was the first book I bought as a student of archaeology when I did a course on violence on Athenian vase painting with Marion Meyer, so the circle is closing. Anyways, I'm going to start. Studying the history of rape is biased per definition. Almost every contribution bears the stamp of its time and is influenced by modern definitions of rape, by the changing attitudes towards sexuality and lust, and not least by the discourse on gender relation, and maybe also about the influence of culture and nature. Let me start with a more recent example. The song Baby It's Cold Outside was written by Frank Loesser in 1944 to be performed by him and his wife Lynn Garland at their housewarming party. Later, it starred in the movie Neptune's Daughter, from which this still is taken. The structure of Baby is a back and forth conversation between the male and female singers. The woman has dropped by his house on a cold winter night just for one drink. However, the woman gives plenty of indication that she wants to stay the night. We see this in the entire organization of the song. She stays longer, she's willing to have another drink, then later another cigarette, and so on. She's also admitting that she's under a spell. At this time, the time period of the song, good girls did not spend the night at a man's house. The tension in the song comes from her own desire to stay and society's expectations that she'll go. For gentlemen, on the other hand, it was accepted and expected to express their intentions clearly and to exert gentle pressure. That's what I say, at least. What might seem a little creepy and stereotypical to some of us was pretty progressive back in the days. In the past couple of years, however, Baby has gained some awkward popularity as a date rape song promoting sexual violence. Here are some quotes from a random close reading in the internet. There are many of these. The man is accused of exerting undermining tactics while she states her intentions loud and clear. Her mentioning her worrying parents at home is read as a sign that she's underage. He's slowly breaking her will with creepy flatterings. And then, what's in this drink by the side of the woman? There we have it. The creepy villain has drugged his baby to break her will. In fact, this expression was a common joke in the 30s and 40s to excuse your own behavior. But who cares about the context? There are seriously endless line-by-line readings and hate texts in the World Wide Web, and they also become more and more during, I think, Valentine's Day when this song is played over and over again in the radio. One blogger writes, even typing those 4 slimy words, baby it's cold outside, forced me to take 7 showers. 50 shades of rage. Thankfully, there are no feminist bloggers raging about erotic pursuit in ancient Athenian vase painting. Yet, there are the same pitfalls. Our modern interpretations of pursuit and abduction scenes in Athenian vase painting are not solely based on close readings of ancient imagery, but linked to social agendas of our own times. Admittedly, most scholars have given up their furious accusations against ancient patriarchy in favor of a more differentiated perspective on the dynamics of ancient gender relations. Academia is not as ham-handed as the World Wide Web, after all. However, there is a tendency to concentrate on the female victimhood and thereby neglect their status as agents in their own right. That might be my impression only, but you're always more aware of the opinions that contradict or challenge your own points of view. So today I will concentrate on the visual representations alone and leave out the historical contributions on historical realities of sexual violence entirely, in the confidence that there will be many contributions on that from more qualified people in the next 2 days. The images of pursuit and abduction may have numerous layers of meaning, from political implications to reflections on the tragedy of the human condition. However, I will focus on the meaning concerning their relation between the sexes. After all, this is a conference about rape and not about politics. Just a short inventory of the material. The theme of erotic pursuit and abduction becomes extremely popular in the early 5th century Athenian race painting, as Robin Osborne already pointed out. Most of them are heterosexual. The typical pursuit and abduction scenes show an individual male hunter chasing a woman. The male figure can be divine, heroic, or a nameless mortal, while the object of desire is almost always a young, unmarried heroine or nameless girl, with the exception of Thetis. Furthermore, the sexual approaches of beastly creatures like satyrs and centaurs are often depicted in the same motifs of grabbing and chasing, but those guys mostly act as groups of perpetrators. Yet another category is the homoerotic pursuit with a male divinity running after mortal youth. And last but not least, there's the goddess Eos, chasing or carrying off a male youth and therefore epitomizing the topos of the insatiable female sex drive. Besides the just mentioned variations concerning the identity of the involved parties, the images also show various modes of interaction that convey different levels of agreement. On the cup to the left, you can see a satyr imposing his massive erection on a repelling Maenad, who's about to ram her fennel staff into his manhood. Oh no, sorry. No, you can't see that. Yeah, well, I choose Boreas and Räuchle instead. And as you can see, she's raising her arms in an alarmed manner and really fleeing. And the only clue that she might be willing into his approaches is that she's looking back, and we already talked about this pregnancy of the look of the gaze, these erotic meanings. I hope that the palicure in the middle shows Maimone ambiguously reacting to Poseidon's approach. She retreats from his threatening gesture with his trident, while at the same time gazing back curiously and lifting her veil in a typical bridal gesture. On a wine jar, I hope that is right now, in Paris, we see Dionysus himself trotting behind his future wife Ariadne, confident that he won't need the vehemence of his fellow pursuers. Thus, the scene is ripped from all the usual dynamism and shows a rather sedate wooing rather than a vehement pursuit. These examples suggest that the reaction of the quarry depends on the identity of the hunter and the specific circumstances of the encounter. Yet there's also a wide range of interactions for one and the same couple. Poseidon and a Maimone may serve as an example. According to Apollodorus, the blameless, that's the meaning of her name, the blameless princess Maimone encounters, while searching for water, a satyr who desires to force her. But Poseidon appears on the scene, the satyr flees, and Maimone sleeps with the sea god. In turn, he reveals to her the spring of Lerna. At the images, the figures can be identified by Poseidon's trident and by the girl's water container. Since the underlying mythical narrative is ambiguous in itself, in terms of Maimone's approval, we are not surprised to find the same ambiguity in the visual account as well. In fact, there is a wide range how to characterize the situation. On the lekythos to the right, Poseidon wields his trident towards the girl and almost spikes her breast while she raises her hand in a gesture of supplication. Only the stilted fingers of the god's outstretched arm and her right foot halfway turned towards him might weaken the violence of this scene. On the crater in St. Petersburg in the middle, the god's weapon is suggestively growing out of his loins, and the princess is fleeing. However, she returns his determined look and presents him the open mouth of her hydria, itself a rather explicit sign for the female body. The latest Pelican Rome shows the most amicable version of the encounter. Poseidon's trident is lowered and he gently puts his arm around his lady lover. A Maimone's body language leaves no doubt that she's welcoming his approach. With her head lowered in full devotion, her eyes bent by his masculine hairy chest, her right hand resting on her heart burning with desire. That might be a little overinterpretation, but yeah. Anyway, these different nuances are not only individual choices by the painters, but can be seen as a chronological development where the vehement encounters of the late archaic and early classical times are slowly replaced by more pacified depictions. And this also goes well with the general development of other topics as well. This becomes particularly apparent in scenes of the Dioscoroi, or what? Dioscoroi? Abducting the daughters of Lycippus. On an earlier representation to the left, the girls spring apart with their arms raised and distressed. In a later version, in the middle, suggestively paired with the pursuit of Maenads by satyrs in the lower register, one girl is even holding the reins of the chariot while her abductor is standing behind her, making an almost Titanic-like move. And lastly, on the hydria to the right, one of the latest abduction scenes at all, the former wrestling hold has morphed into a highly erotic entanglement. This is not a violent kidnapping. And interestingly, as I said already, this can be found on a vessel that is at least traditionally associated with women. So there is a clue that the abduction scenes seems to have fostered female fantasies as well. As we have seen, the images of pursuit and abduction can convey manifold tones and facets concerning the force exercised by the suitor and the willingness of the prey. These nuances depend partially on the identity of the involved parties, partially on the time of the image production. Against this background, the lowest common denominator is, in my view, to interpret these scenes as visualization of a sexual encounter. Not rape, not sexual violence, but just sex. These visualizations are clearly shaped by ancient gender roles we clearly do not endorse anymore, but it is not necessarily non-consensual. Nevertheless, it seems to have become common practice to label these scenes as representations of rape or sexual violence. Eva Keuls was the first who programmatically claimed that all scenes of heterosexual pursuit and abductions had to be understood as a foreplay to rape, hence a metaphor for patriarchal oppression. For her, the images convey a clear message of sexual violence and show no interest whatsoever in the consent of the succumbed party. Thus, the theme of pursuit is a direct signifier for an Athenian rape culture and its reign of the phallus. Since then, most authors have taken a much more nuanced approach and acknowledged the ambiguity of the scenes concerning the consent of the involved women. The scenes are now most commonly interpreted as male imaginations of a tempestuous male bursting with sexual energy versus a wild and animal-like female whose reluctant nature is, however, all ready to give in. These imaginations are understood as vehement yet ideal representations of ancient power structures. They can either be seen as general statements on male-female relationships, or, especially in the case of Ephebes chasing young girls, as metaphors for marriage as the final taming of a woman. This understanding of the images and the underlying value system can hardly be negated, and judging from the ancient sources, most ancient Athenians would subscribe to this conclusion. It is thus an emic perspective that is entirely backed up by the collective self-perception as presented in ancient texts and images alike. As Alexander Heinemann puts it, the task of the desiring male lies in overpowering, literally yoking the female's untamed animal nature, whose attractiveness ultimately lies in its very renitence. In this rationale, the resistance of the woman expressed in her flight is not necessarily a sign for her deep anxieties about male sexuality and marriage, but first and foremost, a behavioral norm that heightens her sexual appeal and at the same time proves that she's wife material. The inherent sexual double standard is also apparent in the baby song. We can criticize its message from our own modern perspective, but this doesn't help us to gain a better understanding about the past. Labeling scenes of pursuit and abduction as rape means, in my view, to impose on ancient societies our modern definition of this criminal offense and our modern ideals of gender equality. It also means to take for granted that ancient female experiences are comparable to those of women raised and socialized in modern Western societies. Culture shapes your emotional experiences, no matter if you are a member of the dominant class or a subordinate. Pierre Bourdieu calls it the complicity of the oppressed to their own oppression. Ancient Athenians, male and female, had a completely different understanding of gender relations and sexual consent than we have. The predominantly male attitudes we can grasp from most of our sources are still, in my view, much closer to ancient female experience than our modern understandings. We get closer to the experiences of Athenian women when we do not treat them as victims of a phallocentric society, but as active accomplices of that very system. I'm done, almost. This approach should not be exclusive, of course. There's no doubt that many women experience blatant violence in male-dominated societies, and still do. But their agency has to be acknowledged too. In my view, this holds also true for our times. Up to this day, the sexual double standard is apparent in millions of codes of conduct, very little ones, and mostly in much milder forms than back in the days. It starts with little things like the man picking up the check and at the first date or making the first phone call. If we really want to end the male domination, this very subtle violence, symbolic violence, women have to stop adopting the victim role by paying their bill. Thank you.